Steve mentioned that in a few days we're coming up on Valentine's Day. I want to know from this group, how many of you ladies have had your special guy serenade you by singing a love song to you on Valentine's Day? That's rather sparse. And you'll notice my wife didn't raise her hand either.
Thankfully not.
Okay. Well, thinking about Valentine's Day for a moment and love songs, I want to share with you the words, or some of the words, from one particular love song that was made popular by Elvis Presley. And so some of you may not recognize this, but others of you will, I'm pretty sure. Some of you then are saying, who's Elvis Presley? But anyway, we'll leave it there. Here's the lyrics from one of those songs. Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin if I can't help falling in love with you? Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be. Take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you. That's a 1950s love song to those of you who weren't able to date that, but that's where it comes from. There are love songs in the Bible, love songs in life. Especially are there love songs of a unique type in country music. That has its own special flavor, as some of you might recognize. The Greeks had 4 words for love. English language has only 1, and therein lies confusion sometimes, but the Greeks had 1 word for the love of a parent for a child, very appropriately identified. They had 1 for brotherly love. They had another for the erotic love of lovers. And then they had 1 more that indicates the special, selfless love that knows no limit as it loves for the benefit of others. That word is agape. And that's the word that's used in the Greek in 1 Corinthians 13. So there's reason to know what that word means and how it is identified. I want to read that chapter. You're familiar with it, I'm sure, even if only you have heard it at weddings. But it's a very well-known passage and a very wonderful passage. This is, I'm reading it today from the Letters to Young Churches, and it's the J.D. Phillips translation. And whatever translation you have access to, either your own that you're carrying or the one on the screen, I hope you will notice it with some care. It reads like this. If I speak with the eloquence of men and of angels, but have no love, I become no more than blaring brass or crashing cymbal. If I have the gift of foretelling the future and hold in my mind not only all human knowledge, but the very secrets of God, and if I also have that absolute faith which can move mountains, to nothing at all. If I dispose of all that I possess, yes, even if I give my own body to be burned, but have no love, I achieve precisely nothing. This love of which I speak is slow to lose patience. It looks for a way of being constructive. It is not possessive. It is neither anxious to impress, nor does it cherish inflated ideas of its own importance. Love has good manners and does not pursue selfless advantage. It is not touchy. It does not keep account of evil or gloat over the wickedness of other people. On the contrary, it is glad with all good men when truth prevails. Love has no limit to its endurance, no end to its trust, no fading of its hope. It can outlast anything. It is, in fact, the one thing that still stands when all else has fallen. For if there are prophecies, they will be fulfilled and done with. If there are tongues, the need for them will disappear. If there is knowledge, it will be swallowed up in truth. For our knowledge is always incomplete, and our prophecy is always incomplete. And when the complete comes, that is the end of the incomplete. When I was a little child, I talked and felt and thought like a little child. Now that I am a man, my childish speech and feeling and thought have no further significance for me. At present, we are men looking at puzzling reflections in a mirror. The time will come when we shall see reality whole and face to face. At present, all I know is a little fraction of truth, but the time will come when I shall know it as fully as God now knows me. In this life, we have three great lasting qualities: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of them is love. Not a new message, but an important one, of course. What you may not realize, if you haven't looked at this with some care, is that this chapter is sandwiched right between two chapters that deal with the meaning of the gifts of the Spirit, with explanations about that, and explanations about how those gifts can be used and or abused. So the love chapter is right in between, and it's introduced with the last verse of chapter 12. Did you notice it? And I show you a still more excellent way. And then he talks about love. So he puts love right square in the middle of a very vital teaching. It was vital to Corinthians then, it's vital to us now. And I think it's an awesome bit of language that has a broad range, and sometimes we can maybe miss how far it reaches out and how deep it goes. It's an awesome language that love has. Now I want to kind of look at this in three categories. 3 points and a poem. You know, that's the prescription for preaching. But this breaks itself down into 3 parts, and so I won't belabor that point. But the first thing I want you to know about this quality of love is its integrity. Integrity is something that we always find attractive, particularly in other people, but nearly everything in life, both good and bad, can be affected by the issue of integrity. If it has integrity that characterizes everything that it is and everything that it does, that's wonderful. If it doesn't have that, there's going to be problems. And so Paul begins to look at the gifts of the Spirit that can impress people the most. The first three characteristics that he looks at, the one is the eloquence of preaching. Now, he talks about, if I speak with the eloquence of men and of angels. If it's characterized by love, it is effective. If it is not characterized by love, it becomes a self-serving kind of noise. William Barclay said, and by the way, you may have discovered as the scriptures were read, that the element of prophecy can be a two-pronged thing. It can be talking about things that are going to happen in the future, but more importantly, and I think here it talks about the declaration of what God has to say to people now. It is the forthtelling, not the foretelling of truth. And so we approach it that way. He said, the preaching which is all threat and no love may terrify, but it will not save. And I think we might be able to identify that in various ways, but there was a preacher in the earlier life of America. He preached a sermon entitled "A Sinner in the Hands of an Angry God," and that sermon was apparently so effective as he dealt with it from that standpoint that people held onto the backs of the pews to keep from falling into hell. Must have been a great sermon, but it may or may not have been delivered with love. So you can find people, to borrow some phrases from a few other people. You may find preachers who can preach the stars out of the sky and the birds out of the trees and all that sort of thing and make a great noise, but if it's not done with love. And I think I remember hearing somebody say in my presence many years ago, when a preacher preaches about hell, if he cannot do it with a broken heart, he best not do it at all. So there's integrity of love that's so important, and biblical knowledge that's delivered without love may be effective knowledge about the Word of God, but if it's delivered out of pride or out of some sense of being better informed than others, it becomes a snobbery. It requires love to be given effectively. Or if one has faith, or super faith, as it might be described, and it's important to recognize that when miracles are prayed for and do not happen, sometimes there's an awkward kind of relationship with God, and an awkward kind of relationship with prayer that comes out of that. And I have come across people who have prayed earnestly for some kind of miracle that didn't happen, and have become angry with God because it didn't happen. And I have heard others tell of people who have said to them, in light of the fact that that miracle didn't happen, you didn't have enough faith. And I can't think of anything more destructive to somebody who's hurting than to say to them, your prayer wasn't effective because of your faith. I have more faith than you. That is not helpful. Then there are gifts that demonstrate sacrifice, which must be done with love. Generous giving is always helpful in some degree. But generous giving with strings attached can be anything but helpful. It can be humiliating. William Barclay said, to give and accompany the giving with a smug moral lecture or a crushing rebuke is not charity at all. It is pride, and pride is always cruel, for pride knows no love. And then in that same general category, martyrdom. He talks about putting my body, giving my body to be burned, which would have been a mark of extreme willingness to be martyred. But he said if it doesn't have love, it's not done out of love, it's worthless. And I think probably we can take that idea and look at it a little bit more in depth and realize that there are many ways for us to play the role of a martyr. But if it's not motivated by love, it is worthless. The second passage, the second part of the passage, deals with love's amazing lifestyle. Love is patient. I'm not sure that there are many of us who have not at some point prayed, Lord, give me patience and do it now. And this is patience with people, not patience with things. For when you are working on that piece of machinery or electronics or whatever it is, the patience may be easy enough to come by for that. But when it's dealing with people, that's another category. And love's lifestyle is to be patient with people. Abraham Lincoln was a man of patience, remarkable patience. He had made Edwin Stanton his Secretary of War. He did, he said, and I quote, because he was the best man for the job. But Edward Stanton was not an easy man to get along with. And Lincoln knew that quite well, because Stanton had tested the president's patience many times and probably in many ways. He called Mr. Lincoln a low, cunning clown. Now that wouldn't fly too well with most people. And he nicknamed him the original gorilla. That was part of his cabinet. Yet on the night that Lincoln was shot, Stanton stood by the bedside of the now dead president, and through his tears he said, there lies the greatest ruler of men the world has ever seen. Love is patient with people. Love is kind. And if you've ever known someone who has exhibited some aspects of love and yet without a real kindness, you know the dilemma that you feel when there's just an expression of love, but somehow gets mixed in with a bit of unkindness. Back in another century, the Catholic Church that prevailed in England became the Church of England, as you know, by the official edicts, I believe, of the King. But the last Archbishop of Canterbury, while the Catholic Church was in charge, was not known for his kindness. And he declared that murder and adultery were not nearly as bad as doctrinal heresy in the Catholic Church. Lacking kindness. Love is not envious. There are two pieces of envy. One is to envy what other people have and wanted. The other is to be angry because other people have something and they don't. It's a meanness of soul that cannot reconcile the idea that things are not always distributed as equally as we might like. In the Sunday school class this morning, we dealt with a phrase of Scripture from the Apostle Paul in Philippians 4, where he said, I have learned to be content in whatever condition, whatever state I am in. Love has learned the meaning of contentment. Love is not a braggart. It has also grasped the meaning of humility. And it doesn't go around bragging and doesn't really need to hear the message from Jesus when he said, don't seat yourself at the head of the table. Love is not inflated by its own importance. Love does not insist on its rights. It's a difficult thing sometimes to deal with when is a good time for us to claim what might be rightfully ours and when it's not a good time for that. But love never throws a tantrum. And I'm sure that y'all don't have any way of experiencing what that might mean. But tantrums, whether they are thrown or done by adults or small children, are probably always a mechanism for control. It's an effort to get what is wanted or to manipulate others for what we might want to see happen. Tantrum is an ugly thing. Whoever throws it. And we see it in children and we recognize it and know that that's going to be a problem if we can't get past that. One of the most touching parts, I think, of this particular part of the passage is what comes next. Love does not keep score of wrongs. I don't have a particularly good memory. And that would probably be verified by someone present, but I would rather it not be. Love does not keep on the backside of its memory, keep a list of wrongs that it has experienced. And I think maybe because I don't remember things too well, I probably fortunately forget some things that it's best I not remember. But I remember some things too. I remember what somebody said to me 35 years ago. I remember what somebody did that I really did not like 40 years ago, or maybe some other things that I could dredge up. But love keeps no score of those wrongs. We don't have a list of wrongs that we have recognized that have happened to us, and we don't like it. And we look for a possible way of getting even somewhere along the way. Love does not do that. And I don't know about you, but I suspect that our most efficient use of our memory is in remembering the wrong that somebody did to us. But in order to keep that alive, you have to go back occasionally and dredge up that piece of experience that you didn't like and reacted to and were offended by. You have to dredge that up once in a while and re-warm it up before you can put it back to bed for a while. Love keeps no score of wrongs. Love does not know how to keep records like that. Love finds no pleasure in evil. Whoever does it, upon hearing of the sins of someone else, love does not look for somebody to share that fresh bit of gossip with. Love finds no pleasure in evil. Love does find real pleasure, though, in the truth. And it is always good to know that you are part of a community where truth is highly valued. Love finds real pleasure in the truth. But love, and I don't know that this phrasing is anything that I came up with, but in the scriptures it says love endures all things, bears all things. Maybe a little bit awkward wording, but the beautiful language of love is that love puts up with anything. Again, I'm quoting Barclay. More likely it means that love can bear any insult, any injury, any disappointment. It describes that kind of love that was in the heart of Jesus himself. Love puts up with anything. And love continues to hope, even when there is no good reason for that hope. It means taking God at his word and means the unconquerable spirit that believes the best about other people, as long as it is possible and as long as facts can somehow relate. Love has a very serious problem of being suspicious. Love has learned how not to live with a continual suspicion about in that passage talks about love's absolute supremacy. Love has a kind of eternal permanence that sometimes defies description. Love is eternal in its nature. The things that bring joy and satisfaction in this life and sustain our feelings of accomplishment will one day be seen as being like an infant's level of understanding compared to the full knowledge of God when we're able to live in that complete divine understanding. Let me see if I can get a handle on this for a moment. Excuse me. You may be able to teach an infant that a stove is hot, and you hope to be able to help them understand that it's not wise to touch that when it's hot because of the injury that it can cause. As an adult, you don't have to have that described to you. You know the nature of that, and maybe you have a little bit of scientific understanding that something that is 100 degrees may be warm, but something that is 200 degrees is going to burn you. And so you have a new understanding beyond what that infant can be able to understand. I think that's what God is trying to say to us in this passage. And that is that we can only understand a small part of the way in which life can be lived, and life can produce so many wonderful things that we may not be able to see now because they're beyond our understanding. Love has a way of transcending the simple things that we might understand now and reaching into the other. But perhaps more easily understood, love has a God-given clarity to it. He talks about mirrors. The ancient mirrors that were used in Paul's day were probably just polished metal, and the effectiveness of them was a little bit like what you might find when you go to a carnival and you stand in front of a mirror that's deliberately warped to make you look strange. Well, the mirrors that they used in that day gave something other than a clear image. They were like trick mirrors. And so the image that a person saw was a distorted one. To be able to live out the love that Paul has been talking about means being able to seek the kind of clear understanding of how we really look. Not like we look in a warped mirror, but how we look before God and to God, and how we can understand ourselves better in order to be able to know if we are actually living out the love that Paul's been talking about. It's a God-given clarity. We need that clarity so that agape love can be lived out. And love has what I call an unquestioned supremacy. Paul, in case anybody had missed it in what he's already been talking about, he wanted them to hear it with absolute clarity. There are a lot of good things in the world. There is faith. There is grace. And he wanted them to take everything that he had been talking about, the way love lives out all of the things that he's been talking about. And then he says, faith, hope, and love, but love, he said, is the greatest. I came across something that I want to share from Donald Gray Barnhouse, a minister who's long gone now, I think. But here's what he said in interpreting this chapter, rather interpreting the fruit of the Spirit. He said, love is the key. Joy is love singing. Peace is love resting. Long-suffering is love enduring. Kindness is love's touch. Goodness is love's character. Faithfulness is love's habit. Gentleness is love's self-forgetfulness. And self-control is love holding the reins. There's a song that I came across some years back. Love is the theme. Here's the words of the chorus. Love is the theme. Love is supreme. Sweeter it grows, glory bestows. Bright as the sun, ever it glows. Love is the theme, eternal theme. Let's pray. Father, we need to know more about love, agape love, and how it can play out in our lives on an everyday basis, with whomever we communicate with, whoever we deal with, however we live. Help us, we pray, to live in love. Amen. I surrender all. Number 408. Number 408. And as we stand and sing, I invite you to respond as you may feel God leading you, whatever